Üdvözlöm, ez itt a Concord Podcast. Egy műsor, ahol a Concord munkatársai minden héten alaposan megmondják véleményüket pénzről, gazdaságról, politikáról és mindarról, amit egy Concordos nem hagyhat szó nélkül. Tartson velünk!
Our guest today on the Concord podcast is Jared Schreiber. Jared was born in the USA, grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, was a talented athlete, close to the Olympic Games, worked for Intel, Teradata, Retail Solution, studied at MIT, and founded his own company, InfoScout, which later became Numerator. Numerator grew up to be a unicorn size and was sold to Kantar in 2021. He moved to Hungary with his Hungarian wife and his children about 3 years ago, and now Jared is one of the most important angel investors in Hungary. My co-presenter today, Tamás Móró, our chief strategist, and Péter Varga-Szilágyi, a member of our private banking team. I'm Áron Vidovszky, head of Concord's private banking division. Hello, Jared.
Hello, Áron. Great to be here.
When I read about lives of entrepreneurs and startuppers, I always find the childhood motivation and childhood influences as the most important part. Would you tell us about this part of your life a little bit?
Sure. I think one of the most influential factors was starting to collect stamps of all things when I was pretty young in the U.S. And back then, there were price books that listed how much each stamp was worth. You know, a particular stamp from the 1960s might have a certain price, and another one would have a different price. And this idea that you know, a price book could dictate the price that people would buy and sell a product for was something that it was my first exposure to economics, really. And what I started to realize very quickly is going out to auctions or estate sales or other things is that you could buy products buy these stamps at prices very different than the auction price, and you could go other places and sell them at prices very differently. And some of them, regardless of the price, you wouldn't be able to sell them because they were just commodities. Everybody had them. They didn't want them. And some of them, you know, the price might say it was worth $5 in the price book, but somebody might be willing to pay $15 or $20. And I just found it fascinating how different, you know, supply and demand and market forces worked relative to a simple price book. And I think that was my first real exposure to kind of buying, selling, trading, economics. And I really just fell in love with it.
It's very interesting because it was the same situation in Hungary in the 80s, because I was collecting stamp as well. And we had the same book with the prices on it. Mm-hmm. But I thought that this is just because of the socialist era. We have this plan. Everything was
yeah. I would have probably thought the same thing too. But
it's really surprising for me that it was the same situation in the U.S. That there was the free market for 300 years.
Exactly. And I think that maybe gave me an extra appreciation for how the free market really worked, because I was able to create arbitrage opportunities for myself all the time, knowing the true market value of something relative to the official book value.
Yes, and then what I learned that you were studying a lot, and which was really interesting for me, that in a stage of your life you just fell in love with data. How was that?
Right. Yeah, I really lucked into data. I studied supply chain management at university for undergraduate, and ended up at Intel Corporation back in the dot-com heyday of Intel growing like crazy and becoming the world's most valuable company almost overnight, it seemed, back in 2000. And in the process of trying to help forecast and plan the supply chain for the business, it required a ton of data to be able to make decisions. And I had to pull data from all kinds of different systems to understand what was going on. And then when the dot-com bust happened, 2000, 2001, everybody was scrambling to understand what was going on. And the only way to answer the questions was to integrate data from about 20 different systems. And I hadn't worked with much data previously, but I taught myself SQL and how to code a little bit, and built little mini BI applications to start answering business questions with data. And the whole process of it, I just fell in love with, and I saw what an impact it could have in the company. But I also realized, boy, I don't think I just want to do this within a single company. I'll be so confined. I'd love to do this in a way that really affects and shapes an industry.
But when was that? We were very young when you were very high level in the supply management in Intel. So you were very, very successful in Intel.
Intel was a great place for me to start my career. I think it's a great place for anyone. It's just really an excellent developer of talent and potential in people. They take training and management development very seriously. It was a place I feel I really thrived at. I was very analytical, very data-driven. I worked very hard, and Intel had the type of culture that would reward people. If you put in the work and effort and had an impact, you would get promoted. And so, my first 5 years of Intel, I was promoted basically every year, and it just gave me great opportunities to take on more and more responsibility and better understand the strategic nature of the business.
And how old were you when you decided that you would like to study some more things, and you had the idea that you apply for Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which is really the top university in the world, and then you had some luck with it?
Yeah, I did have some luck. So
how old were you at that time?
I was around 26, I think.
26.
So I was 5 years out of college, first 5 years at Intel, and then decided to go pursue a master's degree. For that, I really have to credit my wife, Rekha, who already had her master's degree. It was never really on my radar as a personal goal to do, and she really encouraged me to consider it, to get the best out of myself. And boy, am I grateful she did. And look, I had done well at Intel. I did quite well on the graduate admissions exams, and so I set the bar high and applied to Dartmouth and MIT were the only two schools, and because they were both strong in entrepreneurship in particular. And I didn't get into either. And then one day out of the blue, I got a call from a person at MIT who had just taken over a program and was short on students that fall, and had gone through the dustbin of the people who didn't get into the MBA program, and found my resume and application and said, I think you'd be a great fit for our program. And so he snuck me in the back door, and that was an incredible experience.
And what was this program exactly?
So it's part of the Engineering Systems Division at MIT. It's a study of complex systems, very much supply chain oriented in terms of the core coursework that I took, but in general, the theory of managing any kind of complex system. And then every elective I could possibly take while I was there was in the field of entrepreneurship. So really, it's kind of funny. I kind of dual majored between engineering systems and entrepreneurship while I was there.
So that made you became an entrepreneur those years in MIT?
I knew I wanted to become an entrepreneur. I thought MIT would really help me have an understanding of what I didn't even know that I didn't know, by learning about entrepreneurship from entrepreneurs, from people who'd been successful, from venture capitalists, by being in an environment that spins off so many startups, by participating in the MIT, what was at the time called the 50K competition, where you form a team with fellow students, you write a business plan, you pitch it to investors, and it's a big pitch competition, and the winner ends up getting seed funding for their startup, and had quite a bit of success with that. And that was actually the most I would say important experience I had at MIT was actually the extracurricular business plan competition.
What did you start your own company right after MIT, or during you were thinking
of
starting some?
During MIT, I had a lot of different ideas that I was working on pursuing, including what I was pitching in the competition. And for various reasons, none of them were quite the right thing. And so I started interviewing with startups for when I graduated. And I'd learned so much at MIT in terms of what to look for and what to evaluate in a startup that, one of them didn't feel right because the founders just didn't feel like a great fit for what they're doing. Another one didn't seem right because the market opportunity. And I ended up not joining a startup, but I found a role with Teradata, which at the time had all of the world's largest data warehouses. So the largest databases in the world doing the most advanced analytics at the time in 2004 were on Teradata's platform. And they gave me an opportunity to head go-to-market in the manufacturing sector and industry. And since I'd been so internal at Intel, focusing on things that were more operational nature, the Teradata opportunity was to give me sales, marketing, business development, strategy, all these go-to-market skills that I could develop there in the software industry. It was really a great experience, but I knew my home was in the realm of entrepreneurship and startups. And so I just kept looking for startup opportunities, and eventually, about a year and a half after joining Teradata, I introduced myself to a startup and convinced the founders to hire me as the first outside executive they brought into their early stage startup in Silicon Valley. And that's when I moved the family to Silicon Valley in 2005.
And what was your ideas that some early ideas which wasn't a success, but just watching back to it, it seems interesting, or or what you liked?
I think one that maybe more people could relate to here is I had an idea for a platform where you could personalize anything. So any product that could be made or created, you've seen it with mugs and T-shirts and other things, but literally any kind of product where there could be some level of customization or personalization done. How could you create not only a mall for that, but an experience to make the actual personalization process very easy? And not take inventory of all the goods, which the existing incumbents were doing, but actually to enable suppliers of goods to offer up products for personalization, create a great experience for consumers around that, and then execute on the delivery. And to be frank, I just didn't have the right skills to pull that one off. I wasn't experienced in all the different aspects or the technologies and other things. And again, I've got to give credit to my wife on that one. She really properly kind of challenged me. She's always been supportive, but in that case, properly challenged me of like, are you sure this is the right one and the right fit? And sure enough, it wasn't.
This personalization idea is still very good. I mean, is there anybody who just follows it?
I actually think there's something still there in this, because the existing platforms that support personalization, their business models involve taking inventory. By taking inventory, it limits the types of products that they can offer and sell, because they can only hold so much inventory, and it has a real cost. And so I think the idea of like an Etsy, which is a marketplace for all kinds of suppliers to offer products to buyers across a huge spectrum, but doing that with a really excellent front end for personalization on top that makes it simple and easy for consumers. I still think there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds interesting. And what was can you tell us some words about your actual business and startup, what you started with the other founders?
Yeah, InfoScout.
InfoScout, yes.
So yes, so 6 years after moving to Silicon Valley and helping some other founders build their startup successfully there. Not being one of the founders, I kept looking for my own ideas. And in the process, I had customers of the prior company coming to me with business questions that required consumer level data. How were consumers shopping across retailers for their types of products? Laundry detergent. How are they buying their laundry detergent across different stores? How are they buying their beer across different stores? Were they loyal? Were they switching? Were they price sensitive? Were they responding to advertising? And the existing providers, I learned, just couldn't provide the data. And I was shocked that Nestle and Coca-Cola and big brands were coming to me looking for the answers when I didn't have the data. And so I just started really kind of investigating, why is it? Why is this still a gap? Why can't consumer purchases be tracked across retailers? And the more I explored it, the more I saw an opportunity. And at the same time, smartphone adoption started to take off. In Europe, it was about 65% of households had a smartphone. In the US, it was lagging at about 35% back in 2011. But I made the bet that soon enough, everyone will have a smartphone. The cost will go down. The ease of use will go up. Everyone will have this. And when they do, we can appify and gamify the experience of consumers taking pictures of their shopping receipts, which would give us access to the product level data of their purchases across all retailers. And so that's what we did.
So basically how it works is that consumers take a snapshot of their bill.
That's right.
And upload it.
Yep, just a quick picture from our app.
Okay.
That's exactly it. And they get an instant reward depending on the app. One app was gamified shopping rewards that turned into cash. Another one was charitable donations to a school or charity of their choice. We had one that effectively resulted in lottery tickets with a chance to win $1 million. We had different apps to reach different people for different reasons. It allowed us to get a broader array of demographics and psychographics of the population, so that when we pulled all the data together, we could be more representative of the American shoppers as a whole.
And I guess you also made this application very easy to use, because that's one of the success of making consumers engage.
So true. I learned so much on that front. I'm glad I had some great people with me who had better skills than I did on that front to make it successful. But yeah, we ended up getting millions of consumers to engage. We captured over 1 billion shopping receipts, which is really a billion, 1 billion. Yeah. Shopping receipts is just massive amount of data. At one point, we were capturing 1 in every 350 shopping trips in America. People were taking a picture of the receipt to put in our app. It's a massive scale.
Yeah, that was always the main question for me: how to motivate people to make a snapshot and just it's millions of people. I mean,
it's so funny that was one of the hardest parts about fundraising for the business originally. We could not convince venture capitalists or angels that we would be in the US, in Silicon Valley.
In Silicon Valley.
That was probably the problem, that we could get consumers to take pictures of their shopping receipts because they were of the mindset, well, I wouldn't do this. Why would anyone else? And we're like, look, a VC is not really who we're expecting to take a few moments to take a picture of the shopping receipt. But there are tens of millions of people who pinch every penny every day. And there are other people who are just motivated by micro rewards and micro gaming and Tamagotchi games and little lottery tickets and other things. And we think we can tap into that kind of social psychology and do it at scale. And we did, but it was a hard road to get there because we couldn't convince investors that we'd be able to do it.
And how hard was to use this data, to process this data? Because I can imagine you had hundreds of millions of photos and you had to make something and use this data.
And the data on receipts is completely non-standard. Every retailer does it differently. And so that actually became the core IP of the company, was figuring out how to take these short product descriptions on receipts and decode them and match them to real world products so that we could then harmonize and aggregate the data and make it representative of what really happened. That was the core IP of the company. Very, very good question.
Yeah, the data science was improving while you were collecting the data.
Exactly right.
You were developing together with the data science.
Absolutely. And continue to this day. Just try and get better and better every day.
You have to make valuable data from receipts.
That's right. That's right.
And then what was the next step? We understood this, the business model of this.
Yeah, so look, it's a B2B2C model, which means we sell to businesses, but we also engage consumers. It's a two-sided business model. And two-sided business models come with chicken and egg problems. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do you solve for the business side or do you solve for the consumer side? And the answer in these, whether it's a marketplace or a B2B2C, is you solve for whichever one money can solve first. Money couldn't buy us customers, but money could buy us consumers. And so we put money into acquiring consumers, incentivizing them to take pictures of the receipts, getting enough data together where we had enough data of interest that brands would start willing to pay for it. And then we could get the continuous flywheel circling off of that. So the key was, putting just enough effort and money behind acquiring consumers and getting them to engage such that we could get brands to take an interest in the data we were collecting.
How much time did it take to scale up the business so that you could sell your data to companies?
Roughly, we actually started doing some early projects, surprisingly, within 5-6 months of launching the app. I think that really surprised me. A lot of people had told me it's going to take you a minimum 18 months to 2 years before you get your first clients. But actually, the real-time nature of the data we were capturing, we could process it every day because we were using modern database and analytic architectures, and we were doing it at a scale that the competitors didn't have, so we could actually answer business questions in near real time. Turned out to be very valuable, and so we started getting clients much faster than expected.
Sounds really an edge that you had real-time data day by day. Yeah.
It was a huge edge.
And do you think this is generally true today, that if you're thinking about a data science business, you should first collect the data, and when you have lots of data, you can convince VCs that you could use it. But first, you have to have the data.
You have to have the data.
Whatever it costs, for how much, whatever it costs, you have to collect.
Right. You have to solve for that first.
Yes,
if you're going to have a data-driven business, you have to demonstrate to investors and the customers that you have data of value. Fortunately, our lead Series A investor, Bain Capital Ventures, saw that we were starting to collect meaningful amounts of data. And even though we hadn't started to monetize it yet, they believed in our team's ability to go monetize it based on work we had previously done. So as soon as we solved for the consumer side of the equation, they were the first investor willing to take an early bet on us and say, boy, the way you're collecting data, if you keep this up, you're going to have a valuable data asset, and we are confident you will be able to monetize it with brands. And so, my hat's off to Bain Capital Ventures and Ajay Agarwal, who was my lead investor and board member, for taking that bet.
And I can imagine how valuable was this data. To speak about current times, that we were talking 2 years ago during COVID, that you were checking, you sold the company, I think, for that time, but you were checking how the consumer behavior changed because of COVID. People started to buy food and toilet papers,
people weren't eating out as much, so when they don't eat out, how does it change their grocery shopping behavior? Are they trading up in the meats that they buy? Are they eating lunch at home instead of eating out? Which of these trends are just blips and noise versus what is signal for what are ongoing changes? changes, a lot of brands won and lost massive amounts of market share and revenues and profits during this time as a result of how lifestyles changed due to COVID. And we were on top of it. We were really the leading source to get an understanding of how consumer behavior was shifting during COVID.
How was the competitive landscape? Did you have any competitors, others trying to capitalize on this?
Well, we had an incumbent that had been around for 70 years that basically invented the industry called Nielsen. They are Kantar's biggest competitor globally. They're the biggest market research company globally and Kantar's biggest competitor. And there was another competitor to them in the US, IRI. And so the two had 100% market share between the two of them. They'd been around forever. There used to be a saying in the 1980s that nobody ever got fired for choosing IBM. So if they had to make a software choice, buying IBM was the safe bet in America. Well, guess what? In market research, nobody ever got fired for choosing Nielsen. Nielsen was the safe bet. And so convincing companies to say, you might want to rethink that Nielsen data and take a look at this upstart instead. That was challenging to overcome the strength of inertia associated with their incumbency.
I guess they were the dinosaur and you were the upcoming.
They had 50-year relationships with these clients. They had hundreds of people on the ground employed at the clients as part of their contracts. So they were truly embedded in their clients. It wasn't just the data was being used to drive decisions all the way to the board level. It's that their people were on the ground in the meetings with and in the offices of the team members and executives at the clients, and we're trying to squeeze our way in.
Yes, that's very interesting.
Congrats that you managed it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely amazing. And how was this? Maybe if we are too fast, then just please tell me. But what was this Numerator doing before InfoScout?
How did InfoScout become Numerator?
Yes.
So raising venture capital is really, really hard, even in Silicon Valley. Even if you have a company that's growing 3x year over year, it's still not easy. It takes a lot of work. And so in a data business like ours, where we had to spend a lot of money incentivizing consumers to share that data with us, we were burning a fair amount of cash. And so we had to raise money quite regularly to keep growth up. And quite frankly, it just got harder and harder, not easier and easier, as well as the business was doing. And at one point, had an opportunity to put the company together with MarketTrack. MarketTrack was another company in the, let's call it retail and advertising data space, very adjacent data set, selling to the same brands, the same marketing agencies, the same retailers. And they were just being bought by a private equity company called Vista Equity Partners. Vista Equity owns 40 software companies around the world. They're as large as Oracle in terms of revenue. They're huge. And so they were buying MarketTrack, and MarketTrack was large and highly profitable, but not growing. We were small, growing like crazy, but not profitable. And they figured if we put the two together, as did I, that we could create financial synergies and business synergies and go-to-market synergies that would result in a company that could just grow faster together and build something much more valuable. And so we put the two companies together in 2017, and we rebranded the two companies together as Numerator, and continued to grow the business at an even faster pace as a result.
How difficult this process was how many months did it take? I mean, just to imagine, it's a
the process of coming to a merger.
Yes, from the first idea to make it together.
You could call it a 6-month process that happened in 2 weeks. So what do I mean by that? Well, starting to have strategic discussions of different companies making strategic investments in us or a joint venture, and then some of them all of a sudden decide they want to acquire you, and you start going through deeper discussions and due diligence. And then in our case, we signed a letter of intent to be acquired by one company. And then they just slowed down the process, and the time expiration on that letter of intent expired so that we could go talk to other companies again. And Vista came out of the blue, and within 2 weeks from our first conversation, we had a formal written kind of agreement in terms of merging the company together with MarketTrack. So it was a 6-month process that took 2 weeks.
Did you know each other before personally?
Not at all.
Not at all.
No, it was incredible. I've never seen something like this happen so fast. They have a reputation for moving fast, and boy, did they deliver on that.
What's interesting to me is how you can put these two managements together. Like you have a company that's not growing, making profits. I think it's a very comfortable position. And on the other hand, there's you who is like growing. So how can you match it?
Yes, just to be sure, how many people was InfoScout?
We were about 130 at the time of the merger.
And how many people were?
And they were 600-700.
Yeah. So that's a much bigger company.
That's right.
At that time.
Yeah, much bigger company. Much bigger company.
Yeah, sorry, just back to Tamás's question.
They were multiples larger, and we were just growing like wildfire. So if we hit our numbers within 2 years, we would be the same size or larger than them. And so the question is, how do you not slow that growth? And so the strategy was for me to continue to be CEO of the InfoScout business and continue to grow it, figure out where integration made sense to actually grow the companies faster. The area of sales was one. They had 70 salespeople across all the accounts we wanted to cover. We had 17, 20. And so we were able to get their salespeople to sell our product across the accounts where they already had relationships. You could imagine that really accelerated things. And
you could triple your sales potential.
Exactly.
How much time did you work at that time on a daily basis? How much time did you work per day at that time?
It was extreme. I think I look back now, and if a wiser me could have done it with fewer hours. I don't think it's necessary to put in 18, 20 hours a day. That's quite often what I was doing. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. It's not healthy. It's not sustainable. And looking back now, I realize how much time I spent thinking about things, working on things, worrying about things that really weren't going to make a difference at the end of the day. I could have done it with a lot less effort had I been a little bit smarter.
And jumping to here and today, and why did you leave Numerator, and how did you end up in Hungary?
Sure. So there are two main reasons why I did that. One is building a startup is a grueling task. It is fully demanding. It takes your every part of your being from morning until late at night, and then over and over again. And I traveled a ton as well. And as a result, I just wasn't around my kids growing up nearly as much as I wanted to. And they were starting to enter their teenage years. And I realized if I don't change something now, I will miss out on the opportunity to have these last few years with my kids at home. And as I talked to kind of older, wiser friends of mine, they said, you'll blink and it's gone. And so it just became really important to me. I had the opportunity finally to take a step back and focus more on being a father than a founder, and I couldn't say no to that opportunity. So that was one, and two, to be candid, the skills required to take a company from 0 to 1 or 0 to 100 are often quite different than the skills required to take a company from 100 to 1,000, and my skills lend themselves to getting companies off the ground and going. My skills are not at their best when you have 5 layers of hierarchy and 3,000 employees and all hands calls, of whom I only know 150. I love to know my employees. I love to know what their goals and ambitions are and how to align those with the interests of the company and to collaborate together. I love to know about them as a person, not just as an employee. And that just doesn't scale very well. And so I start to struggle a little bit beyond 100, 150 employees.
So Numerator became too big for you.
It did, honestly. It just became too big for me. I had the opportunity to become CEO, and I knew I wasn't the right person for the job, and it wasn't the right thing for me at that time in my life because I just would miss out on these last few years with my kids. So it actually made the decision pretty easy to take a step back. I was fortunate that they asked me to stay on the board of directors and stay actively involved in the company, advising, not just as a hands-off board member, but as a very active advisor consultant to the company and many of the executives. So I stayed actively involved, but from Hungary for the next several years, all the way until the final exit last July.
And what was the time when Kantar started to look at Numerator as a target?
Well, funny story. Kantar actually led our Series B investment back in 2014. So Bain led our Series A in 2012. Year and a half later, Kantar came in, would not take no for an answer in terms of working with them, and finally just put a nice bid out there to lead our Series B round and really invest in the company. And so they joined our board of directors. We started working with them in different areas. We got to know them pretty well in the process from 2014 all the way through to the final acquisition in 2021.
I see.
And why did you choose to live in Hungary instead of Silicon Valley?
It's a fair question. I think there's a number of ways to answer that. One is we've always been very close to Hungary. My wife is Hungarian. My kids have been coming over and spending summers since they were tiny. They've gone to school here at different times of growing up, and so we've always been very close. We're close to my wife's family, both her parents and her sister and our kids' cousins. And so it was just a great opportunity to get closer to family. I think also there's a lot to like in terms of just the cultural experience of being in Hungary and Europe at large in a way that's just different in the US, quite frankly. And finally, I'd say, Silicon Valley is a great place to be a founder. It's not necessarily, and raise a company, it's not necessarily the best place to raise kids. The focus of what's important is just very different on a day-to-day basis. And to be frank, I think better to be a kid growing up in Hungary than in the heart of Silicon Valley in that environment.
And you found a place where it's difficult to raise a company, but good to raise kids.
I feel like Hungary. I do feel like that. Honestly, it's been eye-opening for me as I've started small little companies or worked with a number of founders here in Hungary. It's a lot more difficult to do it here than it is in Silicon Valley, and it's actually become a passion project for me. If I look forward to the next 10, 20 years, what is it that I really want to work on and do? I'd love for it to be easier for founders in Hungary to have the same opportunity for success that I did having started my company in Silicon Valley.
I know that there are hundreds of differences between Silicon Valley and Hungary from this point of view, but can you name a couple of main differences between
in terms of the ecosystem?
Sure.
Well, certainly access to capital and good capital is a huge difference between the two. What do I mean by that? If you're a Hungarian founder and you want to get your first angel investor who's willing to write you a check off of a PowerPoint or a very early prototype, how many different people are there that you could possibly reach out to who are going to write a check meaningful enough that you could actually build a working prototype, get it in use with the customer, get some results to go get your first venture capital fundraise? There aren't many of us here.
Less than 5.
Right. And most of them have very particular sectors that they focus on. One's in cybersecurity and pretty much doesn't invest outside of it. Another one's in medical products and medical devices, doesn't invest outside of it. And by the way, great. I'm so happy to have them in this ecosystem, focusing on their skills and their value and helping the next generation of entrepreneurs. That's awesome. But it just leaves a very limited pool of that very early pre-seed stage capital or first check capital in Hungary. In the US and in Silicon Valley in particular, it feels like every other person's an angel investor. I mean, any employee who had Facebook stock or Google stock turned into an angel investor on the side. And so there's a lot more access to early stage capital, that first check.
My experience is that it's quite the same also for venture capitals in Hungary. A good friend of mine has a successful and internationally recognized startups, and I started to help him to raise funds here in Hungary. You see it better, but my experience is that Hungarian funds are not big enough to be able to support Hungarian or local startups to be competitive on an international market. What's your opinion about this?
So I would say clearly at anything before the seed stage, that's absolutely true. And what do I mean by seed stage? Seed stage deals at this point are typically €1 million and above, often 2 or 3 million in total. And not that a Hungarian VC is going to take the full round and invest €1 million or €2 million, but they could lead it with a €500,000 check and then bring in other investors, whether it's others in Hungary or others in the region, Czech Republic, Poland, Germany, you name it. That exists. And now there are more and more investors from throughout Europe who want to invest in Hungary, that there's more and more of that seed stage money here. The pre-seed hardly exists at all. So if you have less than €20,000 a month in revenues, I don't know where you're supposed to get your capital in Hungary. There just aren't many options. And on the flip side of that, if you start generating €1 million or more per year in revenue and you're ready for a Series A, there are some Hungarian funds that can participate, but they're probably not going to lead the size of round that you probably want to have if you're trying to grow a company. Now, that's changing, and by collaborating together, the Hungarian VCs are able to make some great things happen. But quite frankly, it is harder if you're a founder here to thread the needle between how do I even get to seed stage, and then once I'm past seed stage, how do I get out of it and get escape velocity with Series A and Series B?
And I'm sure you can have this with your network back from your VCs past. And another question, do you see any best practice also in Europe? We were just talking about comparing Hungary to Silicon Valley, but maybe there are...
Probably not the best comparison because of the size.
I completely agree.
It's not a fair
I think it is the wrong comparison.
Yes,
I think there's a lot that can be learned from Silicon Valley. Y Combinator created the Safe Note, which basically made it super easy for startups to raise initial capital without having to set a price per share on the company, without having to update like investor rights, without having to take on debt for the company. And this is a great invention that started to be adopted worldwide, and unfortunately, it's illegal to use in Hungary. And so there seems to be some clever workarounds, but I'm trying to work with various authorities here to get clarity on, can this be used? Because it's such a great vehicle for startups to use to bring in capital. And so, we talked about Silicon Valley maybe isn't the best comparison. I don't think Israel or Berlin are necessarily the best comparisons either. I think the best comparison that I've seen out there is Lithuania. Why Lithuania? Well, Lithuania was also kind of under a Soviet communist system through its history. It's actually a smaller market than Hungary with fewer people and fewer engineers. It wasn't even its own independent country during that time. And it was on the same trajectory as Hungary in terms of its startup ecosystem until it made a few key changes. And those key changes have resulted in an incredibly thriving ecosystem that has multiple unicorns being produced, and a whole flywheel has started in terms of successful startups generating new successful startups, generating new successful startups. And the key changes that they made were they changed the laws around employee stock options so that it's tax advantageous for all parties to issue stock options to early employees. It helps those startups recruit top talent who might be risk averse to join a startup. But if there's a big enough reward on the other side through stock options, maybe they're willing to take that risk. So they fixed the stock option laws, for example. They fixed some other things related to how to handle different classes of shares so that investor shares have certain rights that employee shares don't, and other things, which are a requirement to get this ecosystem working. And then also their government venture capital arm went in 50-50 on investments with the private venture capitalists. So the government venture capital arm didn't try to pick the winners. They let the private sector say, who do you want to invest in, how much, on what terms? And if you, private sector investor, are willing to invest this much on those terms, we'll match it. So they're not giving grants, they're investing, but they're not trying to pick the winners. They're letting the private sector pick who deserves how much capital under what terms, and supporting and facilitating that. And I've talked to many people in that ecosystem. I do a lot of work in Lithuania now, and it's widely regarded as been a very successful program.
I guess once you have this ecosystem in place, and maybe you have a couple of successful exits, then the pool of capital is growing exponentially.
That's exactly what happens.
Success loop, no?
It's a complete flywheel effect where success breeds success breeds success. Founders who have been a part of a startup that grew quickly and was successful saw what it took. They saw the best practices. They saw what didn't work. They understand a little bit about the recipe for success. They had a wonderful time doing it and building it. If they had stock options, which is a key to this, then they ended up with a meaningful amount of savings coming out of that, where they could afford to take a little risk, maybe invest a little money into their own startup, enough to get a little traction to go take to investors. Their first investors were some of their former colleagues who also made money off of the success of the prior startup where they worked together. That money gets pooled together, and they're off to the races. And so you're right, it grows exponentially, and that's exactly what is happening in Lithuania today. And I chose Lithuania over Estonia because Estonia had Skype. Skype was this huge instigator for the Estonian ecosystem. I think they did a ton of things right, by the way, an absolute ton of things right in terms of changing the laws and supporting the ecosystem. However, they had Skype as this moment of inertia to get things moving. Lithuania didn't have that.
But the Lithuanian ecosystem is still better than the Estonian. This is what you say?
Well, no, I would say Estonia is extremely strong, especially relative to the population. But Lithuania is on fire right now. 2.5 million people. I think they're up to 6 unicorns.
6 unicorns.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's incredible. But I guess they probably didn't shoot for their own market. It's more like because very often I feel that Hungarian startups start to build for the Hungarian market, but I think the Lithuanians, they are so small that they have to shoot for
it. They really cannot think about it because that's worthless.
It's exactly right. And Estonians, they just go, look, where is a large enough market that if we can capture a tiny sliver of the pie, it's big enough that we can generate meaningful revenues and profits and get this flywheel going. And too many Hungarian startups are too focused on getting started in the Hungarian market because it's easy, it's comfortable.
No language problems.
No language problems. But quite frankly, look, English is the language of global business. And so overcome that early, because otherwise it's really going to hold you back later.
And how do you see talent here in Hungary? If we would have the same ecosystem, or Hungary would copy or import the Lithuanian know-how and best practice, do you think that Hungary could produce unicorns as well?
I think Hungary has every bit the talent that Lithuania and Estonia have. Lithuania and Estonia have startups there have both struggled to import certain talent in sales, business development, marketing, other areas that had a 50-year gap due to historical political reasons. They've overcome that. And quite frankly, where would you, if you were a foreigner and you were considering, taking a startup job, would you rather move to Tallinn or to Budapest? I think the vast majority would probably choose Budapest, not only based on climate, but kind of metro size, and it's a beautiful city. It's an incredible place to live. And so I don't think Hungary's at a disadvantage at all it's at an advantage relative to Lithuania, Estonia when it comes to having homegrown talent and sourcing international talent to fill the gaps.
But as you said, there will be some financial and legal changes, how capital is raised, and
there have to be. This ecosystem will not thrive until there are some very real legal changes. The legal structures by which you create a company, a KFT or ZRT, have to change. Okay, the current structures do not work. I could not recommend to any founder today to start with a KFT or ZRT. You're in the European Union. You're a global citizen. Choose a structure that is designed to support startups based on your type of startup. Whether, U.S. Delaware Corp might make sense for some. UK Limited makes sense for some. An Estonian OU makes sense for a lot of Hungarian startups. There are a lot of different options out there that are better options right now. And by the way, I don't want it to be that way. I would much prefer to see raised a startup founded as a Hungarian entity. But the way the legal structure works around these right now, I can't recommend it to any startup.
And do you talk to people from government side to convince them about these? Do you meet sometimes?
Yes, very very simply. I've started to write letters, to set up meetings, to have conversations. I've started to partner with Startup Hungary, members of the Hungarian Venture Capital Association. Anybody who will listen, I will gladly sit down with and have a conversation and say, here's what I've observed. Here's a very real roadblock that exists here that does not exist, not only in Silicon Valley, but doesn't exist anymore in Lithuania or Estonia. And having talked to the members of the ecosystem there who have been at it for decades, here's what they did to change it. Here were the laws that they changed, and how they changed them, and how they went about it, and why it worked. And I really think we need to make some of those same policy changes here in Hungary to have a thriving ecosystem.
I guess the main message here is that those could be made under the EU framework, the EU regulations.
Absolutely.
So it's not like
we don't have to.
American
we don't have to import American, Israeli, or some other or invent something new. We can take something where the legal system was historically based on a Germanic legal system and then went under the Soviet system and has come out of it into the West, and we can see exactly the changes they've made and how they've worked. And by the way, maybe where they've come up short as well and could be improved. but there's a roadmap. There's a very clear set of actions that can be taken that have proven out that they have 5, 10, 15 years of history now. So it's not just immediate, follow the leader. Let's wait. Let's be conservative. Let's see what truly works and doesn't. But now we have those examples, and I think it's time to act.
Listening to you, it's not rocket science just to import the best practice to have some unicorns here.
I don't believe it is. There's all the talent that we need here in Hungary. There are so many brilliant engineers, scientists, just clever people. I've invested in a startup recently that's two guys who didn't go to university, two Hungarians. They're about 19, 20 years old, but they are self-taught. They're hackers. They just launched Shruly, which is a mushroom-making device on Indiegogo. They're at 1,500% of their goal in their campaign. And these guys are just awesome hustlers. They're incredible. They're super talented. They're amazing entrepreneurs in any environment. And look, I think Hungary has tons of talent. It's just, let's not throw hurdles in the way of this talent and obstacles. When they're trying to run a sprint race, the last thing we need to do is throw obstacles in front of them and say sprint, and then throw another obstacle and say sprint. Why can't you keep up with everyone else? That's not fair.
And what kind of other interesting investments do you have in Hungary here? And what's the difference between, I guess you have some Lithuanians as well.
Yeah.
What's the difference between the focus in Lithuania or in Hungary? Or is there any?
Easier to run through the term sheet, I guess.
The term sheets are quite different. So personally, I just have a personal mission and passion to help build up the Hungarian startup ecosystem. And so if I find passionate founders who are going after a very real and international market opportunity, I'm going to listen in a way that maybe I won't do for a lot of pitches that I receive from outside of Hungary. And I'm going to engage them. And even if I don't invest, I'm going to try and go out of my way to be helpful to them so that their hour with me turns into something valuable, even if I don't invest. And so I just have different criteria in Hungary than I do outside of Hungary, because I think we need to give these founders an extra chance at being successful. And so that's kind of the guiding force for me.
Do you have some connection with the other Hungarian angels?
Yeah, so I've started to get to know a number of the key angels over the last few years. Petra Balog and Gyuka Zoltan and some of these guys, they're fantastic. I really feel fortunate that I feel like they've welcomed me into the community as somebody who's just we're all trying to grow the pie. And I love that mentality, and I think that's what needs to spread here as opposed to a zero-sum mentality. So, by the way, that's built into the ZRT stock system. So if you form a ZRT here and you issue a certain number of shares, when you go hire a new executive and you want to give them shares, you have to take away shares from existing employees to give them to the new hire. How do you think that's going to go over?
That seems pretty hard.
That's pretty harsh. That's pretty harsh. That's zero-sum mentality. In every thriving ecosystem around the world, it's not zero-sum. It's grow the pie. You want to bring in that executive, you issue new shares, and you give that executive the new shares. And so that's how it needs to work. That's not how ZRTs are set up to work. That's an example of what I mean when we need regulatory change to support the needs of startups.
We hope someone will listen to you. Also,
yes,
if I look around, and especially in the US, how these huge US companies became what they are, they always acquired other companies issuing more stock, but
issuing more shares.
And so this becomes a currency that you can use as a payment. That helps you grow very fast.
It de-risks bringing on talent who are wary to join a startup. Is an great uncertainty with your career to decide to choose a startup over an established company. And a startup isn't going to be able to pay you as much cash in your monthly salary. So they have to make up for it somehow. The best way around the world to do that has proven to be stock options. So you have to make it easy to issue stock options to employees. It's extremely painful in Hungary. And the best practice in Hungary is to use ghost shares or phantom shares that are off the books. That's how much trust does that build with employees? How much does that trust build with future investors, potential acquirers, companies you want to acquire with your stock? That's not a great way to do business.
And of course, the DNA of the company will be different. If you are motivated by shares, you will work your ass off to make it successful.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So fundamentally, that's one of the most important things that needs to change in the ecosystem here.
I had something that just came to my mind when you said that you are talking to people from the government side. Mm-hmm. And back to your personal career, I read somewhere that you were thinking about candidating as senator in the U.S., but then you find out that that's not a good idea. But
right.
It's really difficult to imagine you as a senator because you're really not a senator type. But can you tell us?
I'm going to take that as a compliment.
Absolutely.
Well,
I mean, we just know the senators from Hollywood movies, which 80% is negative.
Sure.
Yeah. But can you tell us a couple of stories about that, or just some ideas? What was the plan?
Well, I think the long-term plan for me was to have as much positive impact as I possibly can. Just to achieve my potential in the service of others is something that's always just been kind of a personal mission statement for me. And I wasn't going to do that just through business. But I felt like to become a senator who could live up to values and principles and hold them without question, I would need to have enough, let's call it personal wealth, to not potentially be under the influence of money to influence my votes or values, or that I would need money to support my campaign for re-election, and therefore I would be willing to give little things here and there in order to get the campaign finance money in order to get my re-election. And so I always felt like to be principled in politics in the way that I would have wanted to be, I would need to first be wealthy, so that I wouldn't be under the influence of outside money in terms of determining what my campaign policies were, or my values or votes were. So that was the thinking, quite frankly. That was the long-term driver. I think as I started to realize more about what politics was about in America, which is where I'm most familiar with it, as I watched, live Senate hearings and watched the senators take the floor and debate different things, I realized it was a whole lot of chest thumping and ego-driven and dogmatic type arguments. Straw man arguments. It wasn't about logic and reason. It wasn't about doing what's best for our society or neighbors, and so I just really couldn't stomach it. And as a result, I just got completely turned off and decided that is not a path I want to go down. I do not wish that for myself. I do not wish that for my family. I will find other ways to have an impact on this planet.
And have you met any senator personally before you had this idea, or do you have anybody in your mind who you liked?
Well, a couple things. I've had the opportunity to shake hands with a couple of presidents, but I think more impactful was a close friend of mine and my wife's from university days, a man named Pat Tillman. He's known as an American hero. He was an NFL football player, a star in the NFL, really, a rising star when September 11th, 2001 happened. And instead of continuing his NFL career, which was just taking off, he decided to enlist with his brother in the Army Rangers and to go chase Osama bin Laden. And one of the driving forces behind that was the fact that in America, almost all of the soldiers come from, let's call it, poorer economic backgrounds. That's who America sends off to fight its wars, is people from lower incomes. And he just felt fundamentally that's not right. We all get the benefits of living in a kind of a protected and safe and free country, and it just doesn't feel right that it's always the poorest who go and sacrifice their lives. And so he went and did that, and unfortunately he was killed in friendly fire. It was covered up by the U.S. government. It was made into a whole scene out of a movie that didn't actually happen because they couldn't stand the embarrassment of having the hero Pat Tillman killed by friendly fire. But I bring this all up because he was an incredible inspiration to me. He's the most amazing human I've ever met, not because he gave up his NFL career to go join the Army, because of the kind of person he was day in, day out that actually led him to do that. And he was a real inspiration. And I think more than any senator, was the kind of person who really could have made America a better place had he been around to do it.
It's very interesting that we are recording this in 4th of July, the Independence Day. So this is a very nice and touching story for just amazing human, just best active listener I've ever met. People would go up to him, want to ask all kinds of questions about him, and they couldn't ask a question because he would make the conversation about that person. He was so interested in anyone he met. He could go so deep with them so fast. People would learn more about themselves in conversations with him than they'd ever learn about him. It was just really incredible talents, an incredible human being. You mentioned that he was the best listener.
Yes.
It's always very important for me how to make a good listener. And what does it mean in his case?
Wow. So there were some distinctive things about Pat. One is if we were talking, he would hold an eye contact gaze that he could look into your soul in some incredible way so quickly, but in a way that wasn't uncomfortable. It was actually heartwarming, and you could tell he cared and was interested in you. So that undevoted presence and attention of I'm into you, I am listening to every word you say, I really want to understand you and what you're about. The connection was incredible. His ability to ask probing, deep, insightful questions that most people would shy away from because it would just make the conversation uncomfortable. He could do that naturally in a way that was so easy. It didn't make people uncomfortable. They'd have to think, and they'd really share their thoughts and feelings, and he would go deeper and deeper and deeper. And one of the funny things was he had this incredible way of playing devil's advocate on things, where maybe you were saying something on politically or on a religious matter. Maybe he really agreed with you, but he knew it was controversial. He might start taking the other side and start challenging and pressuring in a not too harsh way. But he'd do it because he'd want to understand your rationale and your arguments. And together, you would end up going deeper on a subject than you ever would if you just agreed, yeah, that's right, I totally agree. That's exactly it. That's what most people do in these types of situations, not Pat. Pat would take the other side, probe deeper, really try and understand the heart of the issue from all different perspectives and angles, and everybody would end up just personally richer for it. That's what I mean when I talk about like the best active listener I've ever met.
Thank you very much. It was really important.
Yeah,
it's really useful.
He was the person who really influenced you the most to consider public service.
And then, huge influence in that regard. And yeah, it's absolutely.
And I read somewhere that you are writing a book.
It's true.
Can you tell us something about your book?
Sure. So
is it about data?
It uses a lot of data for sure. So at InfoScout, we tracked consumers' purchases of brands in grocery stores and drugstores and in all kinds of stores. And I worked with every major brand there was. I worked with Coca-Cola. I worked with Nestle. I worked with Unilever. I worked with, you name the brand, I worked with them answering their questions because all of them were trying to grow their brands. And they all had 1,000 different questions. It's not possible, and hypotheses. It's not possible that all of those questions were the right questions to ask or important questions that would really make a difference in their business. And it's not possible that all of their hypotheses that conflicted with each other could be true. But the challenge in marketing and brand management is what is true? Is there science, or is this all just pure art and it's different for everybody and it's subject to interpretation? Or are there some real laws that can be followed here? And I just realized how conflicted all of these different brands were in terms of trying to figure out how to grow. And so instead of answering all these small questions, when I stepped back as CEO, I took it on myself to conduct a large-scale study studying 25,000 consumer goods brands in America over a 5-year period, trying to identify breakout winners, brands that really took off in terms of their retail sales and their market share relative to their competitors, match them with brands in the same product categories that had the same chance to grow but actually declined, and then use all available data to figure out how did the winning brands win and why did the losing brands lose. And so used everything from every advertisement across every media platform, every promotion and sale at every store, web scraping of every e-commerce site for product availability and product reviews, all of 1 billion shopping trips of data across 1 million consumers. And from it have come up with, I think, a number of groundbreaking findings in terms of the keys to brand growth. I've come up with a new framework for understanding how brands grow called the Brand Growth Flywheel. And I'll be publishing all of these findings with kind of examples and anecdotes and interviews with the brand managers and executives at these companies, along with the data behind it, in a book coming out later this year called Breakout Brands.
We look forward.
That's very good, because a lot of companies really struggle building up their sales and really creating a brand that's touching consumers' hearts.
It's difficult. It's a real challenge.
And in today's world, you have these all kinds of social media platforms, influencers. I think the whole marketing and brand building landscape really changed in the last couple of years, even changing today as we speak. So.
The media landscape in particular has changed. It's easier to launch a brand than ever, but in some ways it's harder to get significant attention and traction for your brand as ever as well. And so there are some now kind of, let's call it tried and true principles that if you follow are going to give your brand a lot greater chance of being successful than others that are maybe more hyped in the market and seem more obvious, such as various forms of advertising or in-store promotions that don't actually work, whereas other things like traditionally getting your product carried by more stores by beating down their door and and finding a way to get them to carry your product on the shelf actually works.
All right. So as we speak about the present, I think there's a big, let's say, regime change in terms of monetary policy. There was the age of easy money in the US in the last couple of years.
For sure.
And now it seems to be changing. So how is it impacting your investment decisions?
Sure.
How will this landscape change in the next couple of years? I think we would be glad to know more about
this is where I pull out the crystal ball, I guess.
So just to add one thought that unfortunately we are experiencing in our job and on the stock market that every company is revalued.
Yes.
We would be interested how this affects, as Tamás asked, the startups in different stages.
Let's start with that. So fundamentally, the valuations of startups track the valuations of public companies. And the reason for that is the best kind of exit for an investor is for the company to go public as a publicly traded company. Mm-hmm. And the data is out there in terms of what kind of revenue and earnings multiples companies are valued at. And so that dictates the ability for the investors to get their money or returns out of their investments. And it's obvious how it works at the later stage, Series E, F, G type late stage investments, because within a year or two, the company could go public. It's at that range. And so you use publicly traded comparables to establish valuation. So if software companies were being valued at 15 to 20 times forward-looking revenue, and all of a sudden it's down to 10, 9, 8, 7 times forward-looking revenue, well, that means this private company, if it needs to go fundraise, instead of being able to fundraise at 15 times revenue, which it did a year ago, may only be able to fundraise at 8 times revenue, which means even if they doubled their business year over year, they may still take a flat to a down round in terms of their valuation, which is going to be very, very difficult to stomach. So what I see happening is a lot of companies are going, we need to do everything we can to not have to raise money in the next 12, 24, even 36 months. A norm is when you raise venture capital, you're buying yourself at least 18 months of additional runway to keep growing the business. Mm-hmm. In the board meetings I'm in the investor discussions that I'm in these days, everybody is talking about how to get to 24 to 36 months of runway by lowering costs, not growing so aggressively. So instead of trying to triple our revenue next year, let's only try to double, but let's making sure we keep our burn rate low enough that we have enough cash to keep growing this business for 2.5 years, not for 18 months. If that makes sense.
I guess this means that you have to choose between different projects which really make sense. And
that's exactly right.
Then you have to maybe reduce your headcount or grow the business real differently. So there's a lot of decisions to be made in this environment.
Look, it means managers have to be managers and leaders have to be leaders. I don't think it's a bad thing by any stretch. Quite frankly, monetary policy has been too loose. Valuations have been too high. It's encouraged a lot of bad behavior, a lot of speculative behavior, a lot of poor management that gets away with it because as long as you're growing, who cares? It's easy money. Just burn through it. We're going to see who the real managers and who the real leaders are now in terms of how they handle this and grow through it. And we're going to see some really hyped up companies crash and burn because they really don't have strong management and leadership at the top. They've just been chasing good money after bad because it was cheap money and it fueled the growth.
I just read over the weekend that Klarna, the Swedish buy now, pay later startup, last year they raised money at $47 billion and now it's just 6.5. So that seems to be extreme. At the same time, this is in the financial services business, which tends to be quite cyclical.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of bad loans when the economy turns south. So
That's right.
I think it's going to be a very tricky environment for these types of startups.
It'll be very tricky without a doubt. At the same time, so we see a lot changing for later stage startups. At the earliest stages, I still see deals happening at valuations similar to where they were 6 months ago. That has not cooled off. What's happened is they're not happening as frequently. It got to the point in Silicon Valley where if you met with a startup and you didn't have a term sheet to them within 2 weeks, you had no chance of funding them. If they were a good startup, they would have so many term sheets in front of them wanting to fund their business within 2 weeks. So investors had no chance to do due diligence. They couldn't do their job well. And so although valuations haven't started to come down as much, the ability to have proper conversations between the investor and the founders before a term sheet is offered is starting to happen again. And I think that's good for everybody. I think that's how it should be.
It was fear of missing out.
FOMO drove everything, and venture capitalists are guilty as charged on that front.
And you made a difference between manager and leader.
Yes.
And what stage of startup company needs a manager, requires a manager, and what stage it requires a leader? If there's a difference.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say in some respects you need the leader first, because you're setting out and articulating a vision of something that doesn't yet exist and rallying and aligning people towards that common vision. And management may actually be somewhat haphazard because you don't have processes, you don't have operational rules and structures, you don't have strict hierarchies, you don't have best practices, and quite frankly, you may not need them at the earliest stages. But you do need leadership, and leadership is the the ability to articulate that vision, align and inspire people towards it, to get more talented people on the bus. It's the ability to make tough decisions in the absence of much evidence or information, because we can only choose one, and a willingness to only choose one option versus 5 options, which is something I struggled with early on in my entrepreneurial career. I wanted to do everything and I thought I could do everything, and you can't. You got to sacrifice 4 to get enough effort and focus behind one to make it successful if you want to be successful. That's leadership. I think management is you start to scale and operate, and how do you execute and operate each and every day such that you're getting the best out of the resources that you have, that when a dollar goes in, $1.50 is going to come out the other end in a certain amount of time. These things I think are more management traits and skills, and they apply more at mid to later stage companies than they do at the earlier stage.
So you were a leader. You became a manager, but
look, honestly, I don't think my strength is management. I think a lot of people have enjoyed working for me because I do really care about them and their success as people, whether it's with our company or elsewhere. And I think in that respect, I'm a decent manager. But in terms of, did I get the most out of every single employee every day in terms of their productivity and execution alignment? No. I'm not that type of manager and that good of a manager. There are a lot better managers out there than I am. I do think on a relative basis, my strengths would lend towards leadership of, can I articulate a vision of how something should be and inspire others to pursue it with me?
Yes, when I thought before that you are not a senator type, I have the feeling that you're not a manager type, but you're a leader. This is what I learned in the last hour.
I would not hire me to run operations anywhere.
Yeah.
And my wife's going to listen to this and crack up laughing, going,
Yes. Yeah.
But I think your added value in Hungary could be this, because we really lack of people who have a successful exit from an international startup, been to Silicon Valley, made it once or more times, etc. So it can be really a fresh air to our startups.
Yeah, generally, in Hungary, I have the feeling that we are lack of leadership, to tell the truth. We have good managers, generally, but
I think the leadership talent is there. It has to have the opportunity to develop. So in other words, I was given a lot of great opportunities to grow and to have an opportunity to lead and refine my leadership skills through the process. That happens as you grow a startup. Those kinds of leadership opportunities emerge and skills develop in it. There just haven't been that many startups in Hungary that have been, great successes where people have grown and grown and grown. I think an exception would be like, I've recently gotten to know Sándor Pálffy, who was CTO at the end of LogMeIn. I mean, that was a Hungarian, team and startup, and he didn't start off at CTO. He started off as kind of like a software engineer, and I think he got promoted 5-6 times along the way as the company grew, and it needed more out of its people, and he could step up and take the lead, and he demonstrated leadership, and he grew and grew and grew. And having gotten to know him now, I can see why. Like absolutely super talented. I think there are a lot of other Sándor Pálffys out there who, if given the chance in a growing startup to step up and lead, could do so, and that doesn't take anything away from him at all. I think he's an outstanding talent. But I do think there are those kinds of talents out there. They're just not given the opportunities because they're not in companies that are tripling every year in terms of size. And all of a sudden, it's creating all these needs in the company where somebody has to step up and take the lead.
We hope your words will listen and the framework and legal.
Yes, absolutely. Jared, thank you very much for being with us today. It was very helpful.
I think it was very insightful. I think, me personally, I learned a lot.
Me too.
So it was great to meet you.
Really, really appreciate having the opportunity to discuss this with you. I just think it's really, really important for not only founders here, but I think the economy as a whole. I think having a thriving startup ecosystem will make Hungary's economy more competitive on an international basis, and I think it'll create great jobs and opportunities for everybody. And so I really see this as one of the most important things to tackle in the years ahead.
Thank you.
Cheers for this.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.